Good afternoon to all of you. It's really great pleasure to be with you today, and you will bear with me. Don't worry, I don't have a speech. I have some notes, so I will need my glasses so that I can actually look at my notes while I speak. Yeah, I know sometimes it's difficult doing things simultaneously. Now, thank you very much for the kind invitation, the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy and Dr. Mark Donfried. I would like to thank you very much for inviting me here. This is really great pleasure. I have to admit to you that when it comes to culture, I'm not an expert. I'm trying to become slowly, in the sense that basically Greek diplomats, we have to be an expert in a bit of everything. So since I became ambassador here in Berlin, I have dedicated a lot of my time in actually promoting Greek culture here in Germany. And today I would like to basically share with you a few thoughts about why this is important, how we do it, what are the challenges, and why we should continue. So, and then, my idea is to basically share a few thoughts and then have a discussion with you. Because actually, as was mentioned before, I've been since 2017 a visiting professor in the College of Europe in Bruges. And one of the things that I really love is basically talking to students. Why is this? Because actually they challenge me. You challenge me basically asking difficult questions that nobody else dares. You know, when I'm the ambassador, nobody's daring asking me something really weird because they say, oh, the ambassador might not like it. While you students, you have the freedom, so just don't hesitate, shoot, okay? All right, now, let's start basically by saying, culture, Greece, what Greece has given to the world, the Parthenon and all these beautiful things. I can speak about hours, if not days, about that. But don't worry, I will spare you about that. Also, today's theme is culture, peace, and democracy. And I was looking at that and said, everybody says, well, democracy actually came from Greece, which in a sense it did. Actually, democracy came from Athens. So a city-state in Greece. Not all Greeks, ancient Greeks, were democratic. Actually, most of them were not. But even in Athens, actually, the democracy was, let's say, kind of limited to those who were Athenian citizens. And what I mean Athenian citizens, first of all, I think we have to distinguish between men. Women were not considered to be citizens. So if you were an Athenian woman, democracy didn't amount to anything. Also, if you were somebody living in Athens, but not a citizen of the city, somebody, let's say, an immigrant, again, democracy didn't apply to you. And worst of all, the third category was if you were a slave in ancient Athens. That was even worse, because then not only democracy didn't apply, but you were also a slave. But anyway, so everything is, let's say, relative. Now, I would like, first of all, to highlight that when we talk about diplomacy traditionally, we were talking, when I started my career, that was in the previous century, by the way, we were talking about high and low diplomacy. High diplomacy was what we consider the political issues, political diplomacy, the high end, talking about negotiations between leaders and stuff like that. And low diplomacy, as it was considered, was economics. Everything that had to do with the economy, with business, with energy, with you name it, that was not, let's say, political, that was low diplomacy. By the way, this distinction is pure rubbish. So, we have basically, there's no high and low diplomacy. But what I would like to highlight is, traditionally, when I started working in this job, culture was not seen as part of diplomacy. It was seen as something, at least in my country, by the way, interestingly enough. So that was something that was not part of, let's say, our curriculum. We were not, how should I put it, trained to use culture as a diplomatic means. And by the way, I find this a huge gap, and I think that many countries actually haven't realized the potential that culture, if you do it in a positive way, can have on actually promoting your diplomatic, let's say, objectives. Now, other countries, and I'm thinking about, the United Kingdom, they've got the British Council, France has the Institut Français, Germany has the Goethe Institute, Italy has the Institute Dante Alighieri, and so on. So many, especially big European countries and more other countries around the world. China, I think, has called it Confucius Center. And so they are developing institutes to promote cultural diplomacy through these institutes. So they have understood the importance that culture is actually is having on diplomacy. Now, before anything else, I'd like to highlight a few of the advantages that culture has over other diplomatic means. Why should we, let's say, use culture as a means of promoting diplomacy? First of all, and I think this is very important, and I'll come back to that afterwards, it's a way of reaching many, if not all, layers of one society. Now, what do I mean? If you do political diplomacy, if you do basically, you engage between, I'm the ambassador, I engage with the officials, the German officials, the German government officials, or the foreign ministry, or other ministries, or actually people in the lender, in the states, the German states. I'm reaching out to basically 1, maybe 2, I don't know, % of the population, because these are the people with whom I deal on a daily, day-to-day business. But through culture, it gives me the opportunity, not just me, but anybody who wants to engage, to basically engage to the other 97 or 98% of the population. And this is the big difference. So culture, as I say, is something that allows to have a much wider audience. If you want to have an impact, you have to basically have a wide audience. Secondly, it's something, and this I would like to underline, that it's long-lasting. It doesn't have an effect of a day or 2 or a week or a month. If I do a deal, let's say, or if I do something in traditional diplomacy, it might have an effect of a day, as I say, sometimes a month or a year, but it's something that has an end. I mean, and then unless somebody else picks it up, or if myself, unless I follow it up, it basically disappears. Culture is something that, let's say, is embedded into people. And it creates some reflection, and it's something that, as I said, it's the only thing that, I mean, I'm thinking, that I'm not going to stay in Germany forever. I've been here for 9 months. Normally, I should be here for 3, maybe most probably 4 years, and then I will be gone. And this is the normal diplomatic cycle. What will remain will not be what will remain from my work here, at least what I hope, is not what I have done on the political stage in engaging with German officials, but what I will have done in engaging with the German public. And this, as I say, it's something that is going to last, hopefully. Another third point that I would like to highlight is that this promoting culture, I see it as a win-win situation. It's not a negotiation where somebody, you give and take, and one gets something, the other gets something less or loses something. This is something where both sides, both the person, let's say the country that is giving is winning because we are reaching out, and the receiving is also winning because they're getting, what I call, they become more rich. They have more experiences. They have more, let's say, they are more sensitive about something. And I'll come back concretely with examples to explain what I mean by that. Last but definitely not least, especially for a country like mine, cultural diplomacy can be easy to implement sometimes, and again, sometimes cheap. You can do it with a lot of money or with little money, and I'll come back to that. And especially when countries do not have a big budget, and unfortunately budgets, especially when it comes to culture, are shrinking by the day, this is still a place where you can do with few resources, you can have a big impact. So it's really good value for money. Now, all this is why, you would ask me, why is it important to engage, let's say, in cultural diplomacy? Why, in the first place, should me, for example, or anybody, my colleagues, people, working in an embassy, why should they spend 40, 50, or 60% of their time promoting cultural diplomacy instead of promoting economic interests or political interests? And again, I will give you here a few reasons, and then you can basically argue that this is not correct. I mean, this is a discussion, but the way I see it. First of all, through culture, it allows me to give an image of the country, or my country, as I said, to the broader public. it's not, I'm not speaking only to an elite, and I'm basically giving an idea of what my country today, by the way, is. Not only what it used to be, but what my country is today. Secondly, and this is also, it allows me, but also my compatriots, people from my country, whether they come, from the artistic world, from the journalistic world, from whatever, to engage with people from the other country. So basically, it allows a people-to-people contact. And again, traditional diplomacy was between, I would say, the professionals, or whether it's the diplomats, the politicians, or the elites. Cultural diplomacy allows actually people in the society that otherwise would not interact with other people from other countries to interact. So it's really broadening the horizons. And as I said before, again, it's important because it's a long-term investment. This is something that lasts. And as I say, for example, if I do something and I reach out to the broader public, this is something that will stay behind. If I engage with politicians, and in my case with German politicians or German diplomats, these engagements have an end date because politicians come and go, diplomats also come and go. We get transferred from one place to the other. So if I develop a very close relationship with, let's say, my German colleagues here, diplomats in the foreign ministry, this is great, but that's going to last, 1, 2, 3 years, and then they're gone, and then they go to another country. I go to another country, and that relationship is, let's say, what we have built is kind of gone. Through culture, basically, as I say, the people-to-people engagement, this is here to stay, or at least this is the hope. Now, I would like now to give you a few examples of how we deal with that in the case of Greece and in the case of how my poor embassy, in all respects, is trying to address these challenges. First of all, Greece. Greece, as you all might have heard, has a very rich cultural heritage that goes back to, the ancient times. And everybody talks, I'm thinking here about ancient Greece, and I have here put down some words that in English, like democracy, philosophy, geometry, mathematics, theater, tragedy, comedy, etc. All these words come from Greek. So you actually know much more Greek than you imagine. So we do have a very rich cultural heritage. And most people, know about the ancient Greeks and what they have contributed, let's say, to today's civilization. Especially Western civilization, by the way, because there were all the civilizations that were not so much influenced by the Greek civilization. And by the way, people here in Germany, every people that I meet, when I say I'm Greek, they say, oh, but I studied ancient Greek when I was at school, or I studied the ancient Greek philosophers, or I visited the Parthenon, and saw, etc., etc. What is in common with all these three examples I gave you? They all refer back to something that happened in my country 2,500 years ago, or roughly. Could be 2,300, doesn't matter. Most people here in Germany, if you ask them, okay, how is modern Greece? What has modern Greece? What has happened between those 2,500 years ago and today? Most people here will say, okay, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about it. So this is the challenge. This is what the challenge is. And this is a challenge, by the way, for us Greeks. We have the tendency to always revert back to our what I call our glorious past, and not talk about the present and the future. And this is, but people that go to, that go to Greece now, let's say German people, or you, for all matters, okay, you will see the ancient Greek ruins. That's great. But the other thing that I won't like, you to take from back when you come home, wherever this is what is my country today? What has my country is producing today? And this is the challenge, and this is actually the trap that many ancient civilizations have of glorifying their glorious past, but and I wouldn't say undermining, but not giving enough importance to the present, or even creating a link between the two. So We are talking, and this, by the way, is not just a Greek thing. It's a Roman phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that you find in many other places. By the way, one of the countries that I visited, and I found a very interesting continuation, cultural, let's say that culture, that there's a continuation from the ancient times till modern times, is China, where you basically see, as I said, you can see things that happened 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, but then you go back and then they have all their dynasties, and if you go to a Chinese museum, you will see artifacts from 2,000 years ago, but you will see things from 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, up to basically almost the present. This is actually a very successful way of actually even creating a continuity and showing that basically a country is not just something. So this is one of the challenges that we are facing as Greeks. The second challenge that we are having, and by the way, this is a challenge that we are facing here a lot in Germany. In Germany, we have about 500,000 Greeks. So that's, for a population of 10 million total, that's 5%. That's quite big. Imagine, I don't know, in your countries, imagine 5% of the population of your country living in Germany. What would be the impact? The impact, in theory at least, would be quite big, because this is quite a substantial number. But, and there's a big but here, Greeks here have dedicated a lot of their efforts in doing things and promoting Greek culture, not for the Germans, not for the outside, let's say, population, but for the Greeks themselves. They're doing things by Greeks, for Greeks. They stay in a small circle. They don't, let's say, have, should I put it, the interest, the ability, the capacity to expand and basically say, we have this culture, we have these things, these traditions. How can we engage with the German population? No, they do it among themselves. And a lot of, let's say, the potential is lost there. Because the idea is, if you're in another country, you try to integrate yourself into that country and not remain out, living in the country, but being in, like, almost, I wouldn't say ghetto, because that's a strong word, but still living isolated from the rest of the society. And this, by the way, I see that happens a lot, at least with many Greeks in Germany. Many of them, as I say, they have associations that they say they promote Greek culture. I say, yes, but who are the clients? Who are the people who are actually coming to your events? And say, oh, other Greeks. I said, okay, good. By the way, sometimes these people, and this is the very sad thing that I find, is, and I'll use a term that a British historian has used, was they are twice a stranger. They're a stranger in the country that they live, in this case, Greeks living in Germany, but they're also a stranger in the country where they come from, because the country that they have left, or their parents or grandparents have left, in this case, Greece, has evolved. So those people, their grandparents, they left in the 50s, in the 60s, and these people, they have the image of the country that their parents or grandparents left behind. And as I say, the country has evolved. So Greece of 2025 has nothing to do with Greece of the 1950s and 1960s. Is it better? Is it worse? That's another discussion. But it's different. But many people have lost this touch. And by the way, this is not just about Greeks in Germany. I've seen it also in the Greek diaspora in many other places, notably in the United States, in Canada, in Australia. We have big Greek communities. Now, what can we do to, let's say, remedy this? How do I basically go on about, promoting modern Greece in Germany? And I have here basically a kind of, how should I put it? Not instructions, but guidelines, or at least my guidelines for me. Guideline number 1, I talked about cheap. I said, I don't have a budget. I've got a zero budget in the Embassy for Cultural Diplomacy, believe it or not. Every time that I need to do a cultural event in the embassy, I either have to ask the Greek Foreign Ministry to beg them to give me some money, and 99% of the time the answer is, well, no, we don't have any money, or find other ways. And so what I have to do, and this has made me really, I wouldn't say an expert, but somebody, is to make the best out of every single cent that I'm spending. If I spend 50 euros, if I spend 100 euros, if I spend 1,000 euros, I need to make sure that this has the maximum impact, because I know that money is scarce. And at least in my case, other countries, they've got, floods of money. Although, as I say, this is even being reduced. Most of the countries, especially in Europe, are having financial trouble. So it's really finding ways. And sometimes, and I can give you here two, if you don't mind, I don't want, two examples that I did myself by the way, both of them have to do with exhibitions of photographs, of how I basically managed to create an exhibition of photographs of well, the first case was of a Greek photographer, the second is an American, but it's about Greece, and how I managed to do that with basically zero cost. So the first time was about 2007, so it was almost 20 years ago. I was a young diplomat. I was posted at the time in Tunis, and I wanted to do an exhibition of a Greek photographer who actually was a friend of mine who had unfortunately passed away. And I wanted also, that was also a personal commitment to his memory. And I said, he was an amateur photographer. And actually the pictures he was taking was from all over the world. He traveled all over the world and was taking pictures, very beautiful pictures as a matter of fact. And I spoke to his parents and I said, I want to do an exhibition of your son, and actually we did two exhibitions. One was part of a broader photographic exhibition in Tunisia, and the second was an individual exhibition. So, but I had the pictures, the framed pictures, they were quite big, they were all in Greece, and I had to bring them to Tunisia. So I said, what do? I don't have, zero money, how do I do that? So what did I do? I called the moving company that actually was, let's say, doing the move from that I use when I move from one country to another, and I told them, can you wrap up, package the pictures for me at, do it as a favor to me, because anyway, they said, yes, of course, we'll do it. You are a client, you've been working, you are our client for several years, we trust you, we'll do it for free. And then I called the Tunisair, the Tunisian national airline, and I said, listen, how much can you actually put these pictures in your cargo at zero cost? And then again, I've been working with them, so they knew me. And they said, we'll do you this favor. I said, okay. So zero cost. Then the problem is, how do I import these big frames in Tunisia without having any trouble at the customs? Because, the customs, they might say, oh, but this has value. Well, it has sentimental value. As a matter of fact, that the material value was very little. it was a piece of, metal, plus the picture. And I said, oh, God, what did I do here? And I said, you know what? I'll ask the foreign ministry that they call all this package the diplomatic bag. Diplomatic bag is basically official correspondence that is not being checked. We pay no customs. So we put a stamp on the package, and we say this is the diplomatic bag, and it went through customs without any problem. And I had the opportunity basically to have, as I say, two exhibitions. The added value, well, the local people, Tunisian people, discovered about a Greek photographer. I suspect they had never, before seen a Greek photographer. There was a big exhibition there of several photographers. That was the first time I think that we had a Greek photographer. The other example that I'm actually opening an exhibition of photos. This time it's an American photographer who was taking photographs of Greece from the 50s and the 60s. And he's quite famous, actually. Again, an amateur photographer. He was working in the banking business in his normal day job. And again, these are really beautiful artistic pictures. And the pictures, the frames were in The Hague, so 1,000 kilometers from here. So when I heard about it, I said, oh gosh, what do I do? To bring them with a moving company to Berlin is going to cost me a fortune. I don't have that money. So what did I do? Once I went to a mission, I was actually at the border between the Netherlands and Germany, in Aachen. It was 300 kilometers from The Hague. I went with a car, actually a minivan, and then I took the minivan, I went to The Hague. I literally, me and a colleague of mine, we basically packed the pictures, put them in the minivan, and brought them to Berlin. I think this is this is not very ambassadorial, I know, but it did have the effect. And the pictures now are in the embassy, and we're going to inaugurate it. We're going to do a big thing, actually 2 weeks from now. So, again, and this is an interesting case, as I said, because the pictures, they're all taken from in Greece, about Greece, actually a Greece that no longer exists, but taken by an American. And it's very interesting because, and I'll come back to this point, it's pictures, basically, it's something how a non-Greek, a foreigner, was looking at Greece. And I'll just remember this point because I'll come back to that in a second. Another key issue is you need always, when you do these things, to identify the target audience. Not everybody wants to see everything. You have to identify whom you want to reach out to and how you're going to reach out to. It's not everybody in the world that loves classical music, for example. Not everybody in the world likes paintings. It's not everybody that likes, I don't know, as I said, theater or whatever, you name it. So you have to identify how you reach to target audiences. And you say, okay, you know what, I'm going to do an exhibition of pictures. That will attract audience X. I will do a theatrical play. That will attract audience Y. And you have to start also looking at the people, trying to identify. And by the way, try to identify those that are having the multiplying effect. Like, for example, a journalist who's working in, let's say, cultural events and basically is focusing on, let's say, theater. You say, by the way, I'm inviting you, and, this will create a buzz, and this is something. Now, and here, again, we have also two, broad audiences here more than two in Berlin. One of the audience that I want to reach out, for example, and I mentioned before, is the Greek community. The Greek community, there are about 40,000 Greeks living in the broader area around Berlin, including here in Brandenburg. How do I reach out to them? Well, for example, by organizing Greek cinema in the embassy, showing modern Greek films. This can attract also other people, but mainly Greeks. And then the bigger audience is, of course, attracting the German audience. And this is something that is the most challenging thing. How do you basically make, say, German citizens, why should they bother to come to the embassy, to watch a photo exhibition, for example, or to listen to a concert? We are organizing a classical music concert on the 9th of October. What is it? A week from now. There, you have to start identifying ways of reaching them. And I'll give you the example of the classical music concert. And again, not everybody loves classical music, but there are a lot of people in Germany that they do. There is a strong tradition. We managed to get an orchestra, actually not an orchestra, it's quintets of 5 people. We don't have. They're going to play in our embassy music by German composers, and actually even more specifically from Saxony. Saxony, Leipzig, it's Dresden, it's 2 hours from here. It's actually the hometown, the home place of some of the biggest German composers like Johann Sebastian Bach, Felix Mendelssohn, or, it's not my favorite, but still Richard Wagner. So we're going to play those Saxon composers with a Saxon orchestra, as well as Greek classical composers. This is an example of how I'm reaching out, let's say, to some specific German crowd. I am doing, believe it or not, I think it's on the 23rd of November, I'm organizing an event in the embassy where I'm going to be reading Greek fairy tales to children. I know ambassadors normally don't actually at work time read fairy tales, but this is another way of reaching out to another audience, the children. So children will come and listen to fairy tales, stories. And I think that this is something that, is let's say, broadening our horizons. Now, and here I would like to underline what I said also about target audience and how non-Greeks are looking. One of the things that is most important, and this is attracting attention, is how to find things that actually connecting the country where I'm representing, in my case Greece, and the country where I'm living in, Germany. we need to identify, and this is something that is going to attract, by the way, most Greeks, but also a lot of Germans, identify how those two countries, or actually people from those two countries, even before these countries existed as countries, that means even before the 19th century, the connections that they have. And you know what? I mean, I didn't know many of these connections till I arrived here. But every single day, I discover more and more connections between, and this is about connections between people. And I'll just give you a few examples. I mean, one example, for example, is German archaeologists. Germans have been doing archaeological work in Greece for the last 120 years, and they have made huge discoveries. Actually, they have done incredible job. And this is because they are interested in Greece. So presenting, let's say, the work of German archaeologists in Greece is something that, I mean, again, it needs to be highlighted. I discovered another interesting example that, again, I was not even aware. Greece, as I said, there's ancient Greece, there's modern Greece. In between, and I'm not going to, there was what we call the Eastern Roman Empire that lasted between the 4th century after AD till 15th century AD, what is more commonly known as the Byzantine Empire. And that was the Eastern Roman Empire, but they were speaking Greek. One of the empresses, the daughter of one of the Byzantine emperors, a Greek lady, got married to a Holy Roman Emperor, and she was living in Aachen. And she even had a big impact at the court of the Holy Roman Emperor. And again, this is something, again, highlighting, let's say, a hidden part of, let's say, our connecting story. Another connecting thing is the common Jewish heritage that we have. I mean, I was in the city of Leipzig the other day, and Leipzig has a partnership with the city of Thessaloniki, which is the second biggest city in Greece, I'm sorry. And we discovered that both of them, they had a thriving Jewish community that it's almost extinct now, but that contributed substantially to the history of the two cities. So we said, why don't we do an exhibition and highlight this? And again, as I say, and as I say, the list goes on. I can talk more and more about other. Yesterday, I was in Hamburg on Tuesday. By the way, I travel a lot, unfortunately for me. Germany is a big country. I was in Hamburg, and they told me a German politician, you might have heard, I mean, he was from the 70s, Helmut Schmidt. He was a chancellor. Helmut Schmidt, who was originally understood, I didn't know that myself, he was from Hamburg. He had a very strong connection to Greece. And they said, why don't we do an exhibition about highlighting Helmut Schmidt's connection to Greece? As a politician, he was one that played a pivotal role in Greece joining what is now the European Union. So we should build a huge statue of him. But also, as I said, he had strong connections with Greek politicians. And again, these are tiny fragments, but they bring us together. And as I say, and I'll close with this point, as I said, what is important when you do culture is not I'm not doing things that I find that they please me. By the way, if I would do things that they would please me, I would have Australian culture, AC/DC, playing in the embassy, not classical music. Although I do like classical music as well. So, but what pleases the audience. And as I said, the key question is basically to have a view of how, in this case, the target audience, the German audience, is looking at Greece, not how the Greeks are looking at the Germans. Because if I do things about how Greeks look at the Germans, I have failed in my mission, and I don't want to do that. Sorry for being so long. I dragged on for longer than I expected, but I'm here to discuss with you, take your questions, and again, thank you very much for this opportunity. Should I?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for sharing your thoughts on what cultural diplomacy is and the specific case of Greece. As we said before, although the counselor from Morocco has already arrived, we have a few minutes for Q&A. The lady in the front.
Grace from the US. I have a question more so about your work in your home country of Greece than here in Germany. In the last decade and a half, Greece has seen a huge influx of migration due to various issues in the Mediterranean and due to the refugee crisis, which I know was declared officially settled issue, but still there is a large migration of immigrants in the country of Greece. So my question is, what new challenges has this placed on Greece to accommodate these new immigrants and refugees? And how do you think Greece is able to promote its own culture while accommodating these new ones?
Shall I answer directly? Well, as you like, yeah. Yeah, we can take two together.
One more. Okay, please.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. That was a wonderful speech. You're a great speaker and you had us enthralled. My question to you is, you mentioned, of course, the importance of centers like Germany has the Goethe Institute and other countries have their own versions of the same concept which propagate the local culture, language, etc. So for a country like Greece, which has gone through a little bit of economic upheaval in the recent past, how would you say a country should plan the budget allocation, which you briefly touched upon in your speech as well, even with, let's say, not humongous resources on one's hand, how can a country still go about spreading its culture and cultural diplomacy abroad, is what I would like to ask you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks. So on the question on migration, first of all, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I always say when I've been asked, I mean, by the way, this is an issue that I've been addressing a lot of occasions. I say people have been migrating from one place to another since humans exist on this planet. So people who are saying that, we're going to stop migration, we are going to curb migration, I say this is rubbish. I mean, this has been happening for millions of years and will continue to happen. So the question is not how to basically stop migration, the question is how to properly manage migration and make it a win-win for both. By the way, Europe, Europe is an aging society. We are, let's say, a dying breed, if I can call it like that. And many countries, including mine, but also Germany, we're in dire need of people coming from other countries to because we don't have enough people to basically work. If we continue the trend, and there will be more pensioners than people working. So this is something that now Greece was faced. I mean, till 1991, Greece was a country of emigrants. People were leaving Greece to go and live somewhere abroad. I mentioned Germany, the United States, Australia, Canada, and other countries, but mostly, I mean, those four countries, they have the backbone. Since 91, starting with people coming notably from actually Albania and other countries in the Western Balkans, people started to immigrate into Greece. And this became a huge challenge. It became a huge challenge because the Greeks were not accustomed to receive other people. As I said, they were accustomed to having people leaving the country. But they were not ready. And that created, let's say, a challenge of how basically we can integrate those people who are coming to look for a job, they're coming to, to stay there. I mean, most of these people, at least in the beginning, they were coming to stay. And then we had this huge influx of people, notably between 2015 and 2016, which were called, migration/refugee, because, most of these people were not actually migrants. They were refugees fleeing mostly from countries like Syria and Afghanistan. But there was a big difference in the sense that most of these people, they didn't have the intention to stay in Greece. They wanted to basically go through Greece and actually end up here in Germany. That was, and many of them, did. So, and again, Greece was faced with a tremendous challenge because we didn't have, let's say, we were going through a deep financial and economic and whatever social crisis, In the middle of that, we had to care for 1 million people that were literally 1 million people that were crossing our border. We don't have installations. In deplorable conditions. So that became a huge challenge. Most of them, these people have left. Now, since I would say roughly 2016, the situation is different because people coming to Greece, most of them, they stay. So the challenge that we are having is how to basically integrate them into the society. And I have to admit, sorry. Yeah, I don't know if it's me. Okay, can you hear me again? The challenge is basically how these people, because they are to stay, they are not going to leave, or some of them are leaving, but most of them, they actually stay. So the challenge that we are facing is to basically make them feel at home, make them feel like, okay, they have to, let's say, preserve their own traditions, their own cultures, because this is, by the way, this is making us meaning Greece, more rich, not in money, but in terms of experiences. If we have communities coming from other, we are becoming, as I see it, as a source of enrichment, intellectual enrichment, but also make them, kind of, as I say, feel at home. That means learning the language, which, by the way, is not an easy language, I can assure you. I think it's a bit more difficult than learning German, but anyway, or maybe it's equal. It's about finding a job, it's finding accommodation. I have to admit that we are doing a big effort on that, but it's really, how should I put it? It's really an uphill struggle. It's an uphill struggle because, first of all, we never had the expertise. I mean, if you look at countries like, for example, and by the way, this is not necessarily a case of success. I'm thinking about the United Kingdom and France, who had big immigrant populations. And even they have failed in several terms in integrating them for reasons that I think go beyond this discussion. But we didn't have this experience. We didn't even have overseas whatever presence. I mean, actually Greeks were almost, they lived in many other places around the world, including in sub-Saharan Africa. In many countries you had Greeks. But they were always traders. They were part of the local communities. They were integrated. So as I said, it was difficult for the Greeks to integrate them. And as I said, the financial challenge was also something that, because all these things cost money. And we didn't. Where we are now, I think that we were definitely way better than we used to be. And I think in the last 5 years or 6 years, we have really created better facilities, have kind of streamlined our asylum policy. So this is I think that it's way better. I mean, we don't have these awful scenes. By the way, many people here in Germany, they say, when they think about Greece and migration, they think about the scenes they saw on TV 10 years ago. And I'm saying, okay, this fortunately belongs to the past. But we're not in the ideal world. I mean, we still have a long way to go. Now, if I can turn on your question about, not just Greece, many countries, they think that when we need to cut the budget, we cut it on culture, because they think it's a luxury. And I think, allow me to disagree. I think that it's the contrary. I think that, and I made this point, in my opening remarks, culture is something that, first of all, makes people more rich. And as I say, again, not in terms of money, but in terms of experience, makes them more open, it makes them more understanding. If you understand something that not necessarily belongs to you, it's different, you enrich your experiences. By the way, one of the reasons I became a diplomat is because I want to discover other cultures. And wherever I go, and I mentioned that 20 years ago I was living in Tunisia, which was a very interesting experience, and I had a great time. I always try to get the best out of the local culture and try to, first of all, respect the local culture and try to get the best out of it. Try to basically, because this makes me rich, as I said. Now, so I think that countries should invest more. Countries, unfortunately, as I said, underestimate, or at least let me put it this way, European countries are underestimating the importance of culture. And I mentioned briefly before, China. China is having a very aggressive policy when it comes to promote its culture. Why? I'm not Chinese, so I don't know, but I can suspect two reasons at least. First of all, as I mentioned, China has one of the richest cultures in the world. By the way, that we here in the West, we don't know about. We know very little about it. The first time I was in China, I was in Beijing, and I visited the Forbidden City. I don't know if anybody of you has been there. Okay. And correct me if, I don't know if you come from, where do you come from? China. You come from China. So you're not going to be objective to what I'm going to say. So I'm a Greek. I went to the Forbidden City. I was jet lagged, by the way, but still, I had just arrived. And I was looking at everything around me, and I was saying, oh my goodness, we Greeks, we are barbarians. Look at what they have built here. So that's one thing. So they have a very rich heritage. And by the way, as I say, continuous heritage to build on. And the second thing is they understand the value added of culture. I understand, by the way, that was not the case during the Cultural Revolution, but now they do understand. They say, if we want to basically make ourselves more acceptable, more, let's say, people to like us, we have to promote our culture. And this is, as I say, many countries in the West are, let's say, losing this, are not getting are losing this perspective. And this is very unfortunate. By the way, United States, is another case in point. They have done a lot with basically, and this administration is cutting down on scholarships. I think that this is, detrimental to the long-term benefit of the country, because scholarships, meaning basically, yes, you pay money for foreign students to come and live in your country, but you're creating ambassadors of this country, of the United States in this case, to their country of origin. And this is something that they've been doing for decades. Now, unfortunately, they're cutting back, and I think that this is very unfortunate, to put it mildly.
Thank you very much. Mark invited me not only to say thanks for coming and presenting the background, but also to give the new generation of students a first impression of who's working here and what to expect from our different courses. So let me make a bit of academic sound as some sort of a comment on what I just heard. I think, methodologically speaking, it helps to distinguish between arts and culture, because what you said in the beginning about it wasn't part of your curriculum, it wasn't what you learned at the diplomatic academy. Culture, in my understanding, is a system of codes. The fact that we wear ties, the way we follow protocol, the way we play according to certain rules that belong to a certain scene is essentially culture. And when we look at specific forms of music or photography or paintings, this is art. And art is not necessarily instrumental. You can instrumentalize them for a specific purpose, but then the question is, what's your goal? And you represent a state has interests use available assets, and it could be your economic weight, or a country that has nukes can scare others, or you try to be likable. And then the fact that there is something very positive about your country can be achieved by using artistic expressions, but that's not necessarily something the artist had in mind. Or when we think of something like the autonomy of a piece of art, like you look at something and it speaks to you, or you listen to a piece of music and it speaks to you. This is completely independent from what the artist had in mind, because what you hear and what you feel has a lot to do with who you are and how you are educated and socialized in being able to decipher the system of codes within the artistic concept. Another comment, and that's again something like a different cultural environment. My wife is an art historian. She works in a cultural institution and working with arts. If she would have done what you described as your problem-solving method of getting pieces of art from A to B, she would be fired. Because there are such strict rules of compliance in this country. And when you ask sociologists what happened in what you did, then they would say, okay, money wasn't touched. You don't have a budget. You want to get something done. So you ask for favors. And favors are part of a certain way of how people who belong to a certain social system consider this to be not necessarily a flow of money, but a favor is social capital. It flows. So the fact that you ask something for a favor makes the other person think, well, actually, he owes me something. So next time he orders a service, and it can be done this way or that way, like a bonus pack from what the foreign ministry wants you to sign or something else, the company would ask you, well, can we actually do the premium package? Because that would be in your interest as well as in mine. Not to speak of when I carry a piece of art from A to B without an insurance, and it's not just the artwork of a person that you personally know, and there is some damage. I would get in deep trouble if I would explain to Stanford University that I do something without insurance and didn't contact risk management. It would probably be the end of my employment situation, just because I had a great idea, and in the good old days it was the easiest way to get it done, and you feel great because mission accomplished without even having a budget. Unfortunately, we live in times in which now your head of government and my head of government sit in Copenhagen and discuss if there's a chance to cut bureaucracy and to lower the burden of rules and regulations. But what I just said piles up to the time we live in, and then the cultural concept that they are trying to address as gardeners to cut certain developments that grew too big and too fast is something that simply represents the time we live in, and that is also part of cultural diplomacy, that we have to try to find a common denominator. If by making your work a successful work and growing this continent together, we need rules and norms and regulations to understand under what conditions we operate. And last but not least, the cultural enrichment sounds beautiful, and you guys come all the way from where you come to expose yourself to what we have to say and what you experience while you are in Germany. But this is first and foremost a form of competition. So you transform yourself into something else by educating yourself. But education practically means that you are different from a person who hasn't exposed him or herself by what you experience here, either in a formalized way of school or by waiting for a train that isn't coming, or giving the cashier at Aldi a smile and she's not smiling back, or whatever you experience as a form of human interaction. So by exposing yourself to this and becoming something else, and what you described before about people in the diaspora who don't belong fully to the titular nation or what they left behind at home, this is a form of competition, whether those who educate themselves are more competitive and resilient for what is more to come, or whether the people who haven't been on your journey feel like they have something to lose because they are not as agile and flexible and cosmopolitan and speak languages and are digital natives and so on and so forth. So by trying to defend what they consider to be their culture, they feel in a position that some people, especially in East Germany, feel like second-class citizen. And by looking at the cultural transformation as some sort of a rat race, that you either invest a lot and become a man and a woman of the world, or you feel like there is something that I think needs to be defended, we have different concepts about what culture is for each and everyone. And at the end of the day, something is about to end. And that's partly the reason why in the United States, what you described as a bad development is for those who execute it a great sales strategy to mobilize people who feel on the losing end of the competition, and therefore it gets them into power and it stabilizes the system and it transforms the United States into a different cultural space. And it's not good or bad, but it's good or bad for someone. And this redistributional consequence of culture is also something we should keep in mind and not assume that our privileged position to have all these opportunities are exactly the same what people experience who are in a different position. Shall we leave it like this, or do you want to comment? Well, that's the déformation professionnelle of professors, that the moment you give them a microphone, they give an extra lecture, and then it's difficult to get out of this. But we have already our next guest patiently waiting, and we are a little lagging behind. So thank you very much, Excellency, for the kickoff of this afternoon. And I think without further ado, we continue with the next presentation. Thank you very much.